The Great Pyramid of Giza has served as the most remarkable example of a quiet sentinel for millennia already. In defiance of pharaohs, invaders, and scientists alike, it has protected its secrets. Despite the scorching heat of the sun and the icy stare of the stars, the passageways of the building have been plotted. Its orientation has been researched, and we have speculated until we were blue in the face. On the other hand, the heart of the pyramid remained concealed. It was concealed by millions of tons of limestone, until the hush was finally broken. The voice was not a roar, but rather a whisper. It was a whisper that was given by a ghost. It was not a dusty archaeologist with a trowel who made the breakthrough. Rather, it was a group of particle physicists who were stationed in a temporary laboratory that was buried deep under the Gran Sasso mountain in Italy. Indeed, they were seeking for phantoms rather than rooms when they began their search. On a cosmic scale, their gadget, which is a hypersensitive muon tomography scanner, functions like an X-ray vision machine. It is not by light that it sees, but rather through the monitoring of muons, which are subatomic particles that are born in the upper atmosphere. Muons are cosmic ash from star explosions that regularly rain down on Earth. Muons move through solid matter as freely as mist. Over a period of years, they allowed their algorithms to receive information from detectors that were positioned all around and within the pyramid. A three-dimensional density map of the structure was the end result. It was a gigantic, geometric emptiness that was exactly aligned but entirely inaccessible, and it was placed directly above the Grand Gallery, and there it was, screaming in the negative space. A construction gap, or a chamber that had collapsed, was not what it seemed to be. It was a purposeful absence of content, a cathedral of emptiness that manages to remain concealed from view. The original study, which was dutifully titled Anomalous Density Structure Identified in Khufu's Pyramid, was issued, and the whole world held its breath as it was made public. Nevertheless, the popular imagination, along with a few Egyptologists who went renegade, ran wild. Dr. Aris Thorne, a professor at Cambridge University who had been disregarded for a considerable amount of time due to his techno-spiritual views on the pyramid, was the first person to choose a term for the emptiness that has remained in use: the horizon chamber. The argument that Thorne made was that the Egyptians did not just construct tombs. His eyes lit up with an intensity that caused his companions to feel uneasy. Resurrection devices were constructed by them. A scale replica of the Ascent of the Soul may be seen in the Grand Gallery, which has a towering corbelled ceiling. The horizon chamber is not a place to store possessions that belong to the deceased. It is the beginning of the race. What you see before you is the Ark, the changed and bright condition of the pharaoh, which is waiting for the appropriate cosmic trigger. In spite of the fact that the evidence was indisputable, it was nevertheless quite ambiguous. Where did it come from? Muons were able to display the structure of the air, but they did not expose its contents. There was a black box in the nothingness. After then, the second revelation, which was much more stunning, arrived deep under the bedrock of the pyramid, precisely beneath the pinnacle. A smaller spherical chamber that was structurally flawless was discovered. It was not consistent with any of the Egyptian architectural principles that were known at the time. It seemed to be foreign. It is not in the sense of being extraterrestrial. Rather, it is in the sense of being completely out of chronology. The group referred to it as the seed. Speculations erupted like supernova in the sky. It was a pressure relief chamber, a purely structural element, according to the conservatives, who insisted on its existence. Treasure hunters had a dream of discovering a buried treasure hoard filled with inconceivable relics, maybe the actual burial chamber of Khufu, which had not been stolen by robbers. Under the direction of Dr. Thorne, the techno-historians put up an idea that was far more extreme. They pointed out the pyramid's exact measurements, which mirrored the circumference of the Earth, as well as its connection to the constellation Orion. Additionally, they pointed out that the pyramid was almost perfectly aligned with true north. While giving a TED Talk that has now become famous, Thorne posed the question, what if the horizon chamber isn't a room you walk into, but rather a resonance cavity? Imagine for a moment that the seed underneath is a geological battery of some type. Imagine if the whole pyramid is a machine that is capable of capturing the energy of the planets and stars and that these chambers are the fundamental components of the machine. The deep layer audio scan was the most terrifying and powerful piece of evidence that was taken into consideration. The employment of ultra-sensitive microphones to listen to the natural vibrations of the pyramid, which included the hum of the earth, and the metropolis of Cairo, resulted in the detection of a feedback loop. Through the horizon chamber, a particular low-frequency resonance was being amplified, which was a note that was too low for human ears to hear. This resonance was being sent downwards towards the seed. Once upon a time, the Great Pyramid was more than simply a tomb. For a period of 4,500 years, it was a musical instrument made of stone that played a single chord without making any sound. Finding a way in is no longer the only objective of the quest at this point. A catastrophic collapse or damage to anything precious is a danger that every drill or robot poses. The true challenge is to comprehend the reason for doing this. Despite the fact that we are now aware that the mound we occupy is more than dirt, we are completely unable of comprehending the operating system of the supercomputer. We are like ants crawling on top of it. As time has progressed, the Great Pyramid's hidden rooms have evolved into more than simply an archaeological marvel. They consist of a lock. In addition, mankind has just come to the realization that, despite the passage of 5,000 years, we have never been able to determine what door it was intended to open or what may be waiting on the other side. At long last, the sentinel has made his voice heard. The first word it used was a question, which is something that we are only now learning how to ask. Not only did the revelation of the resonance between the horizon chamber and the seed change the history books, but it also sparked a race that was complete in silence and frenetic in its pace. While the whole world was watching, two different mindsets were at odds with one another behind the scenes. The International Preservation Consortium, IPC, which is a partnership of UNESCO and renowned archaeological agencies, was presented as one of the opposing parties. A slogan that they followed was measure, not molest. They proposed for decades of research that did not include any intrusive methods, using ever more advanced technology to construct a flawless digital duplicate of the pyramid before ever contemplating the possibility of having a physical incursion. It was a source of concern for them that a single wrong stride or a single expelled breath of moisture may potentially disrupt a delicate balance that had been maintained for millennia. Project Ether, on the other hand, was a controversial endeavor that was privately financed and had taken over the team that Dr. Eris Thorne had been working on. Their credo was to hear the music. You must pluck the string. They were supported by a reclusive tech millionaire who had an interest for obscure history. They maintained that intellectual shyness was a sort of passive observation rather than active observation. On the other hand, the pyramid was a machine, and machines were designed to be triggered. It was not a committee that overcame the impasse. Rather, it was the pyramid itself that did it. When the detectors were doing a normal calibration of the Moyne flux, they detected a large spike that occurred spontaneously in the emptiness. Over the course of 73 seconds, the horizon chamber displayed a variation in density that was physically impossible for a space that was filled with air that was not moving. In a sense, it seemed as if the room itself was churning. At the same time, seismographs located all over the Giza plateau detected a subsonic pulse, which was a deep thrum that came from the seed and ascended upwards. This caused the sand in the desert to dance in a peculiar and coordinated manner for a radius of half a mile. Not an earthquake was the cause. The sound was a heartbeat. The occurrence, which was also known as the awakening, caused shockwaves to go across the scientific world. The IPC was filled with dread. There was a vindication for Project Ether. A daring strategy was conceived while the attention of the international media was focused on it, and the Egyptian government gave its unflinching backing. It is a surgical inlet, a purpose-built endoscopic robot, which is a carbon fiber spider with 6 legs and equipped with fiber-optic cameras, LiDAR, atmospheric sensors, and a diamond-tipped drill that is no wider than a pencil lead, would be used to bore a tiny hole through a single block of limestone, which is believed to be the thinnest point of the wall of the horizon chamber. When it came to the day of the penetration, it seemed less like an archaeological expedition and more like a medical procedure performed on a heavenly entity. An insertion of the robot, which was given the name Scarab, was made into a construction shaft that was narrow and had been sealed for millennia. The live stream, which was a blurry and unsteady vision of ancient stone dust lit by scarabs' spotlights, was seen by people at all around the globe. "We are not grave robbers," Dr. Thorne muttered as he stood in the control tent, his face seeming pallid in the warmth of the monitor's brightness. "All of us are midwives." The drill word, producing a high-pitched whine that, in the midst of the utter quiet, seemed to be sacrilegious. Step by step, the bit made its way forward. In the end, after a period of 12 hours, the pressure sensor began to decrease. The piece had gone through the crack. The subsequent events were not what anybody had anticipated happening. The air was not stale in any way. It seemed as if the chamber had been in a condition of complete vacuum. Yet, the sensors picked up on a little wind coming from inside. The reading for the composition of the atmosphere was then received. It turned out that the chamber did not contain the nitrogen-oxygen mixture that was anticipated, nor did it contain a hazardous mixture of decomposition. The container was filled with an inert gas known as argon-40, which is a heavy, non-reactive gas that does not exist naturally in quantities of this kind. An ideal artificial environment that was created with the intention of preventing deterioration for all eternity was a dream come true for preservationists. By extending its fiber-optic camera through the minuscule hole, Scarab expanded its capabilities. A tremendous hush descended over the control room, to the point that the hum of the servers seemed like a scream. Eventually, the video stream was transformed into a picture that would remain ingrained in the human mind for all time. There were people present in the Horizon Chamber. On the other hand, it did not include any riches, antiques, or the tomb of a reigning monarch. A polished black stone that was not native to Egypt was used to construct the walls, floor, and ceiling of the structure. This stone absorbed light to such an extent that the LiDAR system was unable to get an accurate reading with regard to its depth. Hieroglyphs were not etched into these surfaces. Rather, they were comprised of flawless and detailed designs. The diagrams depicted energy fields, orbital mechanics, and DNA-like helices that twisted in ways that were not known to the body of biological knowledge. In its purest form, it was a language of geometry and physics. In addition, there was a solitary metallic item that was suspended in an unseen field and hovering 1 foot above the floor in the middle of the room. It was an orb that was flawless and smooth, and it was about the size of a human head. Whenever Scarab's light passed over its surface, it had an iridescent quality that caused it to change from silver to copper to a deep blue. There was not a single tool mark or blemish, despite the fact that everything was completely seamless. The orb reacted throughout the process of the camera focusing. A gentle, internal light started to pulse from its center, and it began to synchronize with the subsonic hum that was still being sensed from the seed below. Power was being supplied to it. It was in operation. As Dr. Thorne watched, his hypothesis of a resurrection machine began to disintegrate, and then was transformed into something that was both more scary and more glorious. Not a pharaoh's corpse could have been placed in this tomb. A library was located here, a container for time. It is a control room. The orb was not prized possessions. There was a user interface. Prior to the signal being lost in a surge of static, Scarab's last transmission was a single, unambiguous data packet from its chemical sniffer. This was the last message it sent out, an examination of the small particles that are covered on the surface of the orb. A tiny amount of biological material was discovered, not coming from a human being. A left-handed helix that should not and could not exist in nature was included inside the DNA sequence, which was a reflection of our own DNA sequence. This was a very obvious statement. We had a mistaken belief about the individuals who were responsible for the construction of the pyramid and the design of this inconceivable contraption. Also, the Horizon Chamber was not a goal in and of itself. It was a starter pistol that had been fired 4,500 years ago, and we were only just now hearing the shot. Waiting for it was the orb. It is not for a pharaoh, but rather for a species that has reached the point where it can pose this question. It was not the manner in which the Great Pyramid was constructed that was the real mystery. Rather, it was the reason for its construction, and the answer was now hovering in a chamber that was black, pulsating with a light that was patient and old, waiting for someone to eventually say, "Hello."